Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia, here bringing you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews on episode number 52 of the podcast. And this week I have 8 new LitRPG stories to review with you this week. I'm going to begin with Office Wars, the Mailroom Clerk. After that, I'll be reviewing The Wrath of Valenastrious, a LitRPG epic in the world of Samar. After that, we'll be reviewing The Road East, epic LitRPG. This is a Fayroll Book 2. After that, it'll be Solaria Online, launch. After that, it'll be Immortality Experiment, a LitRPG adventure. Territoria, Book 1, another long title. After that, it'll be Travail Online, Resurrection. That's going to be Book 2 in that series. Then after that, it'll be Kingdom Level 2, the second book in that Kingdom series. And finally, it'll be The Other Side, which is a LitRPG short story. Okay, I'm going to move on to LitRPG news. And our first story in LitRPG news comes from Apollo's Thorn. Codename Freedom is up for pre-order. That's written by that particular author. It has a release date of July the 12th. You can find it on Amazon. We'll have a link in the show notes if you want to go check it out. But this is a really good novel that I first read on the Royal Road, and I really had a fun time reading. I especially love the short story. I call it How the Goblin Stole Christmas. It's a fun little short story in that series as well. Really enjoyable. I'm looking forward to reading it on Amazon in just a few weeks. Okay, next story comes from Michael Chatfield. He actually released the cover art for his 6th book in the Amaryllis series, The Stone Raiders Return, and it looks interesting. It's a back view of the main characters. They're looking out into the distance. It looks like they're about to bust open a snow globe. I'm sure it's like a magical force field or something, but I can't help but think that this castle looks like it's in a snow globe, and they've been shrunken down or something, like Toy Story style or something. But we'll have to wait and see what the actual plot is. It is scheduled to be released on Amazon on June the 6th. There is no pre-order though. The author doesn't usually put one up. Okay, next story. Christopher Kinney has put up a new 33-page diary-style prequel to his LitRPG series, Dream State Saga. It's not a LitRPG story. It's not going to get a full review. But it does describe how the dream tech that the game uses in his story series comes to be, and also the experiences of an early beta tester. Again, not LitRPG, but if you're a fan of the series, you'll probably enjoy, the background information. It's kind of neat. And last but not least, Vasily Mahenko is going to be doing a LitRPG meetup in London. He got his visa approved. He's currently looking for fun places to take his family, but he is scheduled to appear in London on June the 24th, which is about a month from now. You can sign up for that particular meetup on Facebook. I have a link in the show notes so that they can organize a particular location depending on how many people they actually get. But it is something that Vasily has confirmed he is going to be doing. So if you're in London, I envy you. I've only gotten to talk to Vasily Mahenko, author of the Way the Shaman series, Galacticon, and the Dark Paladin series, via Skype and Google Hangouts a few times, and I've had a great time talking to him. I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting him as well. And that's it for most LitRPG news. We have one new LitRPG audiobook, and that's Gank, which is the 4th book in the Crucible Shard series. We have a review on it for the ebook version of it, but again, narrator-wise, go check it out. Listen to the sample for yourself, see if you like it. There are 2 titles that are out currently for this week. I just couldn't get around to reading them. I have 8 other ones that I got through, but I'll be reviewing them next week. The first one is Returnity, Rescue Quest, and the second one is Dragonweb Online, Dominion, second book in the Electric Shadow series. Okay, now for some upcoming LitRPG with a ton of stuff coming out next week. Starting with, on the 28th of May, Grimoire Bound. And then on May the 30th, Spellbinder, The Shadow Legacy. On the 31st, the second book in the World of Games series entitled The Eternal Dragonborn. On the 31st, Eden's Gate, The Sparrow. On June 1st, Hero of Thera. On June 2nd, it'll be Fantasy Online Hyperborea. Also on the 2nd, Stay on the Wing, Dark Herbalist Book 2. Of course, on the 6th of June, it'll be The Stone Raiders Return. And then there's a huge gap, and then there's just July. And it's going to be The Hero of Naught on the 1st of July. And we'll go from there because we'll hit all those titles when we talk about the next podcast. But you can get all the stuff that's coming out for July and August. Go to our Facebook page, LitRPGpodcast.com, and you can see it in the first pin post. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. Okay, first story and new releases and reviews that we'll be talking about is Office Wars, the Mailroom Clerk. This is the first episode in this series written by James G. Patton. He calls it the Oditech series. I'll call it the Office Wars series. It is 269 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description of the story. Brand was the first to purchase a full immersion virtual reality pod that he calls the Coffin. But over a century later, he finds himself part of the 1% that does not live virtually. He sleeps in a real bed and eats real food and only jumps into Neurorama to work. All he wants to do is log in, work, log out, and live in general obscurity. Unfortunately, he got the attention of a CEO meeting a stranger in real life and is forced to play a secret game of corporations where that were not penciled into his calendar. While that was bad, he started to question whether Oditech was still in control or had their complacency created, or in their complacency created the noose tightening around their necks. That's enough that you need to read. This is actually a really good story. I had a really good time reading it. Once I got to the part that is the Office Wars, the first 18% of it is not entirely relevant to the main storyline. So the first 10% kind of feels like the author's trying to figure out where the story is going to go. And again, begins with like this kind of too long of a section where the main character is speaking to some other entity in his mind, and he sees all his memories being wiped away, turning to ash. And it kind of goes on for a little bit, but it kind of establishes that the main character's mind might have been altered by an artificial person intelligence that's related to his game and also is extending his life in the real world. That's kind of cool, but again, it goes on a little bit long. And then there's like this long bit of him in a game that's like a first-person RPG shooter thing that has almost no relation to the main storyline. It just kind of gives you an example of him and his AI buddy, who's again a part of him, and what the relationship is, buddy, real friendly, sarcastic humor kind of thing as they, trash this sci-fi world and get this neat artifact. But that's kind of all it really establishes. As of the 14% mark of the story, that's where I would say the real story begins, the one that relates to the most of the novel. There you're introduced to a larger virtual hub of the world and given some background information on what the real world is and why everybody lives a digital experience for the most part. Now, where the novel really starts to shine, where it gets really good to me, is at the 19% mark, where the story turns to Brand's day job in the virtual world, his office job. And from there, it's funny and interesting, and it kind of meshes the observational buddy humor of Office Space with an action-adventure mechanics of a real-time RPG death game. And that's where it really gets good. There are a few spelling errors and continuity errors in the story, but it's nothing major enough to ruin the story for you. Me, I had a good time reading it. So it gets a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, on to The Wrath of Valenastrious, a LitRPG epic, World of Samar, Book 1, written by Jared Mandani. Also, the author's called LitRPG Freak. So there you go. That's how it's actually labeled on Amazon. Okay, this is about 200 pages. Amazon doesn't give you an exact page count as of this reading, as of this review. It is 99 cents, so even at that page count, it's a really good deal. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Also really good. Now, from page 1 of the story, there is some really good character development. Like, it jumps right into describing who the main character is, what his motivations are, backstory. Within a very few pages, you already are empathizing with the main character, which I thought was a really nice start to the story. I'll give you my summary of it. Harry Harrison, a former pro gamer turned drunk, gets in over his head with a loan shark. He gets one last chance to make good by the loan shark by beta testing the world's first full immersion virtual reality game and reporting what he finds to the mob. However, once he's at the testing facility and playing the game, Harrison finds the hero inside himself that he thought lost forever. Will he still be able to spy on the game for the mob, or will he give in to the digital temptations posed to him? So that's kind of my summary of it. The first 10% of the story, again, is mostly backstory for the character. Harrison, his fall from grace, how he got into the loan sharks, why the loan sharks want this information from him, how they're trying to get him to it. And it also introduces the test facility for the beta test for Samar Online. And so there's a lot of, just set up there. You'd actually get into the actual game at about the 11% mark, where the main character chooses to be, it's called a half-breed hunter named Bishop. And the half-breed is like a half-demon, half-human kind of race. Now, just to give you a heads up, the author uses a ton of gaming terms, but he doesn't explain them. So he'll use words like AoE, NPC, spec. He'll describe abilities by name, but without actually explaining what they do all the time. So this is not an entry-level LitRPG story. So if you're already a gamer, if you played MMOs, most of this stuff is going to be really familiar to you. But if you're not that big of a gamer, you might be confused by these terms because they're not explaining it in the story. So just be aware of that. And again, the game stuff in this story really isn't bad. It feels, if you've ever played World of Warcraft or Elder Scrolls Online, it's going to be very familiar as far as the game mechanics go. But it doesn't bring anything new to the table either, as far as the game mechanics of the story go. You'll get question marks over NPCs' heads when they have a quest, or exclamation points, very World of Warcrafty. And the fighting stuff is, the class stuff for the character is really set. It's like every level he gets a few new abilities. He will get a new item as a major quest item, but he doesn't get a lot of choice with those abilities. He's just given them new hunter abilities, right up to the point where he gets about level 10, in which case he can specialize in a class. And from there, again, he's really mostly choosing, he's not really given the abilities, and he's not really given a lot of choice to specific ability choices. He can choose which one he has set in his hotkey bar, but there's not a lot of freedom of choice for the abilities for this class. And again, that's very much in line with modern gaming terms of like World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online. So I thought it was a kind of a wasted opportunity also. As far as the game mechanics go in the story, they're pretty standard, but they're not anything special or new. So just be aware of that. Where the story does shine is the storylines. The storylines are actually rather interesting. At least the real world storyline is interesting throughout the entire novel. It talks about, of course, the main character's motivations for being in the game. His path to redemption in the story is really well done. And, you get the feels, you empathize with the character and in understanding that not everybody's perfect. He had a fall from grace, but the game gives him an opportunity to be the man he once was. That's very well done. The actual game storyline, like the storyline from the game, from the MMO portion of it, is kind of boring up until about the 50% mark in the story. It's mostly just standard quests. The author skips a lot of explanation of the story. He also doesn't give details about some of the quests that the character goes on up until about the 50% mark. But he does talk about in-game and out the relationships that develop between the beta testers. They're basically divided between heroes and villains. And our hero, of course, is with the heroes. And so he helps develop a relationship with those characters in that hero faction. And that is good. But the actual game stuff, the actual game storylines and quest lines are only mediocre up until, again, about that 50% mark. And that's when you start to get some player versus player combat. You get the main character, who's named Bishop in the story as a game character. He forms a guild, and they start going on dungeon raids. And at that point, the combat gets a little more descriptive, more detailed, more interesting. And the main character also starts becoming tempted in game and not just out of the game. And I thought that was a nice little twist. So it's good. The end is a little predictable. If you've read LitRPG Stories 4 or Virtual Reality, artificial intelligence stories, it's not going to be a huge surprise to you. But overall, a good read. I give it a score of a 7 out of 10. Okay, on to The Road East, Fayroll, Book 2. Written by A. Vasiliev. There you go. It is 448 pages, $6.95. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. So it's slightly expensive. It's a little over one and a half cents per page, which is not horrible. Just slightly more than I normally pay. But again, it's not available on Kindle because this is something that's been translated from Russia, so it's also available there. So they could never give Amazon exclusivity. It's for what it's worth. Okay, here is my description. In Fayroll Book 1, Harrington Nikorov fulfilled his journalist mission of writing about the hottest new VR game, Fayroll. He also managed to participate in some epic quests, join a guild, and even stumbled onto a rare quest chain. Now, after completing the assignment, he was promised a very long vacation in Spain. However, in book 2, that vacation is cut short and he's called back to his work at the newspaper. He's not in trouble, like he thought he was. Instead, he's actually getting promotion when the makers of the Fayroll game buy out his entire newspaper. And now he's responsible for a weekly series of articles on Fayroll and has to go back into the game to get more material. Now, in addition to that, his new bosses also want him to finish the quest with the Dryad and bring back the old gods to Fayroll. So that's the summary premise of this particular story. Now, overall, really good time. I had a good time reading it. The first 8% of the story is just what I described to you. It does it in more detail. You get more background information. And it's not, but it does a really good job of getting into the game world very quickly, which is something that I criticized about book 1 a little bit, in that it took a while to get to the game world. And this one gets in within 8%, bam, in the game world. So that's much better improved to me. And again, this is actually a really long series in Russia. It's already completed. And so we're just getting the translated versions. I believe there's like 13 to 14 books in this series. So it's going to be a good long story. But once the main character is back in the game world, he's Hagen, level 33 warrior. And most of the game story is Hagen traveling to the east to complete the next part of the Dryad quest chain. And he doesn't actually get there until about the 75% mark in the story, so don't expect him to get there anytime soon in the story if you're reading it. Most of the story is in the game is going to be him adventuring, killing monsters, raiding dungeons, participating in some player versus player and guild versus guild combat stuff. All really good stuff, but not directly related to that main overall quest line. So most of the story is him just adventuring, and it is good for what it is. But don't expect this epic, storyline, because remember, this is already a 13, 14 book series. And so they have to stretch out that main quest line quite a while. Okay. Additionally, Werewolf storyline is actually really well done. It's actually a lot more coherent than it was in the first book. Main character is training his new staff for the Fayroll paper. He gets into romantic relationships, and he does some favors for his new bosses over the game company, and all that's really interesting, and it weaves into the game storyline very nicely and coherently. So overall, had a good time reading the story. Lots of action, adventure, exploration of the game world. But again, not epic storylines. It's just a fun adventure story for the most part, and I like that about it. So it gets a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, next story, Solaria Online launch, written by Ryan Koski. Okay, this is 289 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. My summary of the story. Jacob is 18, who is turning 18 years old soon. He'll be graduating from high school in the future. He loves playing the best VR MMO, Solaris. Only soon he'll have to sign up for the draft and potentially be sent off to war. That is, unless he wins a contest set up by Solaris. And the company promises the 4 lucky players who win this game contest will not only be able to avoid the draft, but will get a ticket to help colonize Mars. So there you go. Okay. Now the first 33% of the story kind of feels like a waste. It does some things that you need to know about. It sets up who the main character is, Jacob. It sets up all the stuff about the game contest. It sets up who he has on his team, which is going to be himself, his best friend, a girl they kind of know, and a 35-year-old man who they met in game and played with a little bit. Additionally, there's a badass fighter girl who they were originally playing with, but she leaves the team in what feels like a really forced way. And most of the game most of the characters besides the main character, you don't really get to know a lot about. And there's no real backstory in most of them. Like you get some tangential lines of information from them, but you get most of your background information about your main character, which is fine. But it kind of doesn't leave you caring about those other characters as much. It is what it is. And again, I say most of the 33%, most of the first 30% of the story doesn't really matter, because at that point in 33%, that's when the game contest actually starts. And it turns out that all the characters get reset to level 1, and they're sent to a new area entirely where all the monsters are new. Everything's supposed to be new. And so anything you learn about the game from that first third of the story doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter, because everything is reset and changed. So that it is what it is again. And again, the contest is really, for the most part, the contest is set up as defeat the bad evil guy. And the first team that defeats the bad evil guy, those 4 players get their spot on Mars. And And there's some more details about it, but that's the basic of it. Some unique things about the contest course: once you die once, that's it, you're done. Your shot's over, and you leave the contest. So it's a 1-die rule policy, and there are some other twists in the contest story that I won't spoil for you if you're going to read this. But overall, the story was just kind of an okay read. The game mechanics are never really fully fleshed out. I actually didn't know that there was magic in the game until almost 45% into the story, which is not a great deal of information on the game mechanics in the story, I guess. And the contest kind of just turns into a series of fights, whether it's with environment or the players or whatever the case is, quests in the story. It's really just a series of fights. And while the fights towards the end get kind of cool and epic, for the most part, the combat is just kind of meh. And for a very combat-oriented story, that's not great. So overall, the score for the story is a 5 out of 10. It's just kind of a meh story for several reasons, which I've already talked about. So there you go, 5 out of 10. Okay, on to our next story, Immortality Experiment, a LitRPG adventure, Territoria, Book 1, written by Vic Connor. Okay, it is 513 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, this is actually a rewritten story. The author actually says in the Amazon description, this is the second edition of Ravencroft Conspiracy, revised and rewritten with the input from readers. So while I didn't actually know that original while I was reading, and I just kind of recognized, I think I've read this before, and I had to look it up. And it turned out that I was correct. This is the Ravencroft Conspiracy story, a LitRPG thriller. Now, originally I gave this story a 4 out of 10 because it wasn't actually a LitRPG. It was a magical academy story with like a few game references that didn't really matter to the story, and it wasn't really LitRPG. So I kind of gave it a bad score based on that, and the fact that it just wasn't. It was more like teen magical academy story, and it wasn't really appealing to me in the first place. Now, this I have to say though, rereading the story, the author made a number of improvements. It still has the same core storyline of the main character, who is a genius. He is named Nikolai Somov. He's a genius. He's super, interesting in the story, but he's also been framed for the murder of his parents. And the storyline starts off with him there in jail, and then he gets a reprieve by an old man who tells him about this other world. And originally it was this, fantasy world. In this case, now it's been changed to, of course, a virtual reality game world. And in this particular version, he actually takes them within the virtuality game, takes them to like this far space station, and they have a conversation there. And the emphasis really is more on this being a game world instead of a fantasy magical academy world, which is a big improvement. But the same core storyline is still there in that this student, is sent to this Ravencroft Academy to figure out their secrets and report it back to this evil shadowy figure, so that he can become immortal and get on the secrets of whatever. But that's kind of at its core, it's still the same kind of story of him investigating the academy, him, meeting other students, creating relationships, that teen kind of coming of age story drama stuff, and exploring those things at the academy. So that hasn't changed. Now, again, this is a rewritten version of that story. And again, it has been improved on the game mechanic LitRPG story side immensely. Like, you can't go more than 1 or 2 pages without some game notification or some text describing an ability or quest or some character's health bar or status or whatever. So the author really did take to heart the criticism from the readers in making improvements in his story. Like one of my original complaints about the first story was that it took like 30-40% to even get into the game world, and in this particular instance, in the rewrite, you're there within 10%. So it's a much quicker transition into the game world. And again, a lot of the criticism that the author got, he took to heart, and he made the story more gamey. He really did include a lot more LitRPG elements, a lot more RPG game elements in the story, but again, without compromising the original storyline or changing it that much. So good for him. I gotta say, I gotta give him kudos. However, even with those additional game elements, which totally qualifies as LitRPG in my opinion, at its heart, it's that same magical academy story. And that's just not my kind of thing. So even though the story has improved, it's still not I'm not the target audience for the most part. But if you were looking for a good Magical Academy story and you like LitRPG, this is a nice mix now. It does it really well. But for me, it's okay. But it is an improvement over book 1. So it gets a score of 6 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to our next story, Travail Online Resurrection, a LitRPG series written by Brian Simmons. Okay, this is 336 pages, $3.99, so really good price, right on the money for me. It is also available on Kindle Unlimited. Okay, this novel starts out with Coral, who is a nifty skin weaver, crafting skills, and she can make clothes out of monster skin. So it actually starts out with one of the main characters from the previous storyline. Now, if you haven't read book 1, you don't really need to. You're going to miss a few plot points, but you can actually jump right into book 2. And I'd say it's a better choice, in my opinion, because this story is a little more coherent. It's really just a story about friends adventuring together. And going on some nice, interesting quests, but at the same time trying to make enough money in game to cash it out and pay their real life bills. And it does some of those things really well. The group starts out with Daniel, Coral, Style, and Sybil getting rewarded by the Human King's speciesist, racist regent for their good work in the last novel and giving 2 new quests: explore the Elven Forest and scatter the invading elf army, and conquering the Dwarven mines for the Human Kingdom. However, of course, the quests don't turn out as simple or as straightforward as they first appear. So there you go. That's kind of my description of the story. Now, I'm not going to spoil any of the game quest plot lines because they're really interesting eventually. But I will say, though, that the first portion of this novel is only okay. I mean, the part with Coral and the skin weaving and the crafting stuff is always fun to me. But once you get to the group part and their exploration of the Elven Forest, it's only kind of mildly interesting up until the point where they get to the Dwarven mines, and then it gets really good. It does. So if you're kind of feeling iffy when you're reading the story, push past it until you do the Dwarven mines. Then you'll see a marked improvement in combat storytelling and in kind of the relationship stuff from the characters. And again, a lot of the game mechanics in the story are only okay. The crafting is good. I like that. There's always cool loot, questing, great. And the end of the storyline is actually really nice. So I'll encourage you to go through the entire thing. But what I really like about the story is not the action and adventure, which is really rare, because that's the kind of story I generally like, but it's really the characters in the story that shine out the most. And this is something common on the first story as well. The characters are really the highlight of the story. The author does a really great job of creating emotional journeys in this story for the character and making them empathetic. Every single one of these characters, whether it's Coral or Daniel or Sal or Sybil, they each have their own individual storylines, and there's some very touching parts, whether it's in-game or out-of-game. For example, again, this is a slight spoiler. There's a part in the game where Sybil's little sister actually sees her, unknowing to Sybil, singing a song describing about all the horrible things that she's had to sacrifice, taking care of her little sister to pay the bills. And it's a very touching scene. And it's just kind of a really nice example of the author's ability to create depth to these characters, and make them interesting to me. And again, that's really the highlight of the story is the characters. They're interesting and they're good, and I want them to do well and I want them to be happy. So I like that part. Overall, the story is better than book 1. The storyline is tighter, more coherent. And again, at least once you're past that Elven Forest part. So good story. Had a good time reading it. Gets a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, on to Kingdom, Level 2, written by Adam and Drake. This one's a little weird. Amazon listed as 327 pages, but I'd say it's really no more than 150 pages. So there might be something wrong with Amazon's page count thing. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, just to reintroduce you, Kingdom Level 1 was a story that the author wrote, I believe, last year. It tells the story of a janitor who's taken from his world and sent to a game world where he has been, he's kind of being forced to be the king of that kingdom, of a kind of a declining kingdom. The game is deleting characters, deleting land, because there's no one ruling it, and improving the kingdom. And once our janitor goes there, he's kind of forced into the role of a king, And as long as he levels and continues his growth, so will the kingdom, and the kingdom will expand and stop deleting characters and the borders. And that was a very interesting story. Now, in my original review of that book, I gave it a bad review, not because of the storyline, but because of the author's kind of shady story practice, I guess say. The story was listed at 300 pages originally, Kingdom Book 1, only of 30 of which were actually the story. The other 270 were an entirely different novel. And so that's why I gave it a bad review. But the author has since republished the story, second edition. And it's just that story. And this is just this story as well. So I just want to give him congratulations on and helping to motivate the author to improve their marketing strategy. Because without the reviews, I don't think he would have. Okay, at the beginning of book 2, King Rob is in shock from his actions from book 1 and realizing that he's been mocked by the gods. When he eventually leaves the castle, he takes a quest to clear a group of goblins from a nearby farm, and it turns out the combat is a lot harder on his own, especially when he doesn't have magic. Now from there, about the 30 to 70% mark, so a good 40% of the story, is him lost in a high-level zone. And he meets another adventurer who kind of gets him a free few levels by killing things with them and some new gear. But a lot of this is just him being out of his depth and realizing that there's a lot of improvement that he has to make if he's going to live and survive in this game world. And then after the 70% mark, he just goes on a few more quests on his own, and that's kind of all it is of the story. This is not as varied of a story as book 1 was. There are no kingdom building aspects of the story anymore. It is just the main character, the king, killing things, questing, getting some gear, feeling lost, coming back, killing some more stuff. And it's fine. I was hoping for more because I liked some of the parts of book 1 and they just weren't continuing in book 2 as much. So, again, not a bad story. It's better than meh. I give it a score of about 6 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to the other side, a LitRPG series, book 1. This one is a very simple review. It is 20 pages, 99 cents, available in Kindle Unlimited. And we'll read you the author's description. Janik is just the newest of many tags that Joe Frog has gone by. He's been on his sister trail for 2 years now, searching every game world on the neural network, or NetNet. Her mind was abducted 2 years ago, and ever since he's been hacking and shooting his way through every game on the planet in search for her. And now there's that this is the beginning of a series of stories. Okay, here's my review. Short story, not LitRPG. That's the summary of it. This is really the setup story for the serial story, for the series. It explains why the main character is searching through the neural net, a hub of virtual reality networks and games. He's looking for a sister, or a way to restore her mind and her comatose body. There's a small fight scene in a first-person shooter game, but no details on game mechanics or progression and power. And however, I can see a lot of potential in the story because, again, the author is setting up as a hub world where we can go into different kinds of games. I can see it being LitRPG eventually. It just isn't here. In this particular episode in the series, it's either I could classify as either cyberpunk or virtual reality fiction, but not LitRPG because it just doesn't have any RPG qualities at all, to be honest. So for that reason, it gets a score of 4 out of 10, but I hope that it improves. I'll definitely read at least episode 2 in the series and hope that it gets more LitRPGs. But for now, it's not. So there you go. And that's it. Done. Finished. Aha! 8 stories, guys. Got them done just for you. Okay. Thanks a lot for listening and watching. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon. We'll have all links in the show notes for you guys to check it out. But if you want to help us out, one of the easiest ways, just share the podcast on your social media page. Let other people know about the RPG stuff that you love and I love, and we can share the books that we enjoy. Just let them know about the podcast. And of course, our Facebook page or our website that has our recommendation list. Just sharing the good news about LitRPG is a great way to support us as authors and readers, and of course the podcast. So thanks a lot. And if you want to support the podcast any other way, you can do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, hey, thanks for everyone for listening and for watching and for hanging out with me, kind of nerd out about LitRPG, this thing that I really enjoy reading and writing about. And until we can hang out again, folks, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody. Oh, hello, everybody. Okay, test 1, 2, 3, ABC. Hello, hello. Okay, just getting set up for the LitRPG podcast. Got the show notes here. Gonna do my stretches. Lion face. Lemon face. Don't ask what I'm squeezing. Milking the giant cow. Okay. Smiles, happiness, cheerfulness. Okay, folks. Looks like we're getting ready to start in 3, 2, 1.